Okay, welcome everybody to this session about migrating millions of records. When talking about this, it's about Power Platform and dynamics. That's my area. Just so that everybody's aware of that.
Sorry, manager.
Okay, welcome.
Sorry, I had to walk a long way.
So I tried to sort of get the 5 best tips I have for this because we only have 20 minutes. I can talk about this for hours, as you might imagine if you've done something similar. There's also some stuff on my blog where you can read more about like how to, like we talked about how to get the best performance out of the APIs with API limits and stuff like that. So do go there. My name is Gustaf Westerlund anyway, and I'm a principal consultant and founder at my company called CRM Consulting, or CRMK as we try to name it in English. I'm also a 10-year MVP now this year. And then we'll have some... welcome. Sorry?
Hello! Oh, come on then. I'll heckle.
So we have some sponsors. I think you've already seen these guys. Okay, so some tips for doing these large-scale migrations. So the first thing, staging database. Why is that a good idea? And try to get the full the sample of the full data very early. Set goals per table, using the right tools, and having legacy identifiers. There are, of course, a lot more things than this, but I've tried to sort of narrow it down. If you want to talk more about this, we can do it outside afterwards.
Do you mean a database or a...
Database. Okay, so first thing, using a staging database. I've tried to do migrations, large-scale migrations, without doing this, and it's just very, very hard. One of the things we did when we started, we just recently, like this last 4 months, we've done 2 very large-scale migrations. And the first one we actually tried with SSIS and Kingswaysoft to do without having a staging database at first. And we only got a small data set from the last year from a travel agency. And the travel agency didn't have that much business last year. So then our script worked. And we have I don't know if you tried their premium lookup. It's sort of like you can load 2 different sources and then you can have a lookup, and that was smart as like a join in SQL. And that was fine when we had like 200,000 records we joined with. But then we got in the full data, we got 2 million records. And then everything just grinded to a halt. So it didn't work. But then we put it into a staging database, and I did a join between two tables, and that was super fast. Because the SQL databases are meant for this. So that's one thing of doing that. It's also very good to have be able to prepare the data in different stages. So you just get the data from we got the CSV files from the old system. So we just got them in and pushed them in directly to the SQL database. And then we had some transformations done with SSIS, but towards the SQL database again. And sometimes with SQL commands, and we can orchestrate it from SSIS, but still using and then once we were done, we had straight tables in the SQL data in the staging database that we can just push directly without any transformations to or lookups or anything like that to the database. And then maximize the throughput from that perspective.
So using Azure SQL then, or an on-premise?
In this case, we actually used a virtual machine, and then we have SQL installed with that. Yeah. To get really good performance, I would probably have 2 different machines, and because if you have an MSDN or Visual Studio with subscription license, then you can probably just spin up a SQL server on that virtual machine since you're the only one using it. You don't have to have full license of it.
My experience is once you get to about 300,000 records, that's when you import it, that's when it breaks down.
Yeah. And maybe you can alleviate that by adding a ton of memory to that server, but it's not really worth it. So I typically try to use staging database. It makes it a lot easier also to backtrack and troubleshoot things, because you can have the different stages in the database, and you can calculate, you can look at the sums of all the different parts. Okay, so we started with 2 million of these, and then like after stage 1, we were only at 1.5 million. Why? What happened? Did we lose something in like for some join that we did because of there's some data missing or something like that?
If you want to compare large data sets, SQL's excellent at that. It'll do it very, very quickly for you.
Yes, exactly. So I mean, SSIS is a great tool, but together with SQL Server, it's even better. Yeah. And then it's also easier to rerun different parts of the script. So if you run like the first 10 steps, and then you like, and then something breaks, then maybe you can fix some things, and then you can start it from there because you have the data and data set. You don't have to like read into everything. So it makes it easier. We also used, what we did was that we imported, like for instance, all the contacts, and then once we pushed them to Dataverse, we reread a mapping table with just like the legacy IDs, like the old system IDs and the mapping IDs to a separate table. Then we can use that for lookups, which is a lot easier as well. So.
It makes a huge difference if you do that.
Yeah.
So you can just do like an update on the records in SQL with the IDs, and you then just import it in.
Yeah. So we get that back into the database, and then you can use that. So that the output when you have your final like export tables, you will get they have the correct wigs and everything. You don't have to do anything, no lookups at that time. So it's just pushing. Okay, the other one that I probably mentioned here is that once we got the full data set for the first migration here, then we noticed our script didn't work. It did work for like a subset, which was the first like data set we got, but the ones we got like, instead of 1 year back, we got 3 years back, which was what they wanted to migrate. Then everything just broke down, so we had to rewrite it. And then I actually nagged them about this from the start. Like, we want the full data set. We don't want like just last year.
What were the reasons for the breakdown? What sort of reasons?
Like premium lookups don't work if you have too much data.
I see.
Yeah, the one I had was the data from the previous system that migrated in. So that had like, when we looked at it, it was incomplete compared to the recent data. So
Right.
we built it based on a load of lookups that just didn't work.
Oh, I see.
So we had to rewrite it.
Right.
Yeah. So exactly. So and you might run into other types of problems when you have this. Might be the older data that's older than 1 year. It might lack data because they've changed something in the system. So you might have like lookups that are empty or like referencing
Oh, maybe
data.
there's things that they added later.
Yeah, they added a field, for instance, or something like that. So then you're like stuck with like you thought things about it because you made your design about it. Well, from one perspective, and then it doesn't work.
I also found 300 new fields when they gave us the full set of data.
Yeah.
You go, what's this?
And then you can also, when you get this, you can start testing things quite early as well. Pushing some like, basic structure out, and then you can get some kind of quantities out to the customer, to the people who are using it and have it, so they can start checking it, see, are we like on the right track here? Then the second one is like set goals per table. Like what is good enough?
Yeah.
Because if you're migrating like 20 million records or 2 million records for that matter, or you could just say like this example with 1 million records, and they're saying okay, 99% is fine.
I've got 2 questions about that.
Yeah.
Would you not find customers will say I'm 100% correct?
Yeah.
And then secondly, how do you decide what?
But if they want 100% correct,
Yeah.
then that means that will drive cost down.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm asking them.
Yes.
Because they're paying, right?
And then how do you know it's correct to say?
That's a good question as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends. If I'm migrating data from a nuclear plant, I might be we might say 100%, that we have to do like tons and tons of checks.
And you have to have proofs that it's correct.
Yes. So I might compare the data from between the systems.
Yeah.
But if otherwise, I typically just have to tell them, okay, so take out like 20 or 40 or 100 records from the old system and compare them with the new, how they look in the new system, and see, is this what you expected?
Yeah.
And of course, try to have some different like high orthogonality in between the difference, so that they're not the same. It's
Yeah.
like,
Got you.
and then there might be, of course, difference between different tables. Like, so if you're importing leads, might not be that important that you get like a 99.999%. But if you migrate bookings or some like orders or contracts, you might want to have exactly 100%. So set the goals per table and discuss that with the customer to sort of like, this is going to drive cost, and where do you want to sort of not do it. But the thing is that if they say 99%, you have to also tell them, this means that if you have 1 million, if we get 9,000 incorrect records here, that's fine, we're done. And I had to talk to my colleague about this as well, because she's a bit of a perfectionist. and she was like, oh, but we still have 400 errors. It's like, but they don't want it. We're done now. According to what they have decided for us, we're done. We shouldn't. We're not done when we're doing 0, because then we're overdoing it. So we shouldn't. And then use the right tools. We were discussing about this as well. I think you can use Excel for some things, but not if you're doing migrating millions of records. That's just going to hurt. I have had customers where we sort of sent them an estimate of how much time it would take to migrate data, and I generally don't want to do estimates and migrations. But if it's just an estimate and not a promise, then I might do it, but they thought, oh, it's too expensive. And then I told them, well, you can do it yourself if you like. You can use Excel. Here's an Excel template, just fill it in and import it. And of course it didn't work, because the referencing between the different tables were like wrong and stuff. So it took way more time than just doing it, if we had done it with SSIs and Microsoft and like that. And that wasn't a very large migration either. There's some tools in XM Toolbox that you can use for migrating. They're also, I would say, a bit on a smaller scale for migrating data, but they're useful, better than Excel. And then there's SSIS connected with different types of connectors. Microsoft is what I use a lot, and typically, I guess you would sort of stick to one tool that you know. I've noticed that there's something from CData and Zap is this as well. Yeah, so you know.
What about the old favourite, whose name escapes?
Scribe.
Scribe. I haven't tried Scribe. Yeah,
they got bought out, didn't they?
Oh, did they?
They got bought out by Tipco, I think.
Oh, that's right.
So they sort of disappeared.
I remember they were expensive.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're too expensive now.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. It wasn't Tipco, it was
So,
the others.
Yeah, the Microsoft thing is, if you're doing migrations, you can often run just a migration in Visual Studio on a virtual machine. You just have it running. And it doesn't cost any license at all. Maybe it's a good idea to pay them anyway, to be nice to them. Just buy one license or something like that.
I've used Kingsway Soft a lot, and I really rate them. And the company behind it is very responsive.
Yes, and when we've had problems, they usually help out quickly, and they connect out to you and try to solve the problems. They don't try to deflect it. So they're very, very nice to work with, and they really know the API. How to work with it. So they've implemented like the API service protection stuff into their connectors. So if you blast the APIs too much and you get like these exceptions back, you won't see that. It will just like slow down.
To retry.
Yeah, it'll just slow down a bit. So. But if you want to do integrations with Microsoft, you have to think about, or like if you want to push this to Azure Data Factory, where you can actually host it in an integration runtime. That's possible too, but then you have to have a license. So the flip side of Microsoft is you will have to have a SQL server sometimes probably to run it, and then you need a license as well. If you're doing bigger things, just a migration you can probably do it in a virtual machine.
So does Kingsway Soft work without your data factory?
Yeah. Okay. I have a customer. We're doing integrations with them for that. So it's set up that way. But you have to have the integration runtime for SSIS on the data factory, and then it is quite expensive to do that. Yeah. But the comparison is having a virtual machine or something like that instead. And then of course you can write your own code to do migrations, which usually developers like. I used to be a developer more or less. I'm more an architect. I think this is a good idea in some particular cases. Where you
I've got an example for that.
Yeah.
Where I mean, I'm not a developer, but I did end up writing code. I was migrating, unfortunately, cases out of Dynamics into Zendesk, and the customer wanted to do different things with the different types of activities linked to the case. And if it was a this, I had to do that. And if it was something else, I had to do that. And I thought, actually, this is a bit complicated for Kingsway Soft, so I just ended up writing a bit of C# code.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean,
It was low volume. It was just more the complexity of the definition.
and that's typically I would say because it's hard to do your migrations as fast as Kingsway connectors because they're very performant, and you can just like, oh, I want 16 threads and I want 10 in each batch, boom, and you do it. Like if you want to write that code, it's quite a lot of work.
Are you going to talk about throughput into Dataverse?
If we have time.
Okay.
Yes, and then using the last one is using legacy identifiers. So try to figure out some way or some ID per table from where you're going to, so that you can add to the data and include in the data. So you uniquely can identify every customer or every order or order row, and you can have that into the data and store that in Dynamics, in the Dataverse. Because then everything becomes a lot easier to do for migrations. And if you can't figure it out, create one in the staging database. And then be aware of the limitations of that, because that means that every load you do, you will get that to the staging database. It will be unique for that load, but from that load on, you can use it. So it's a lot better than not having anything.
Saves you queries, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, and it makes, especially, and that counts for a lot when you're doing like millions and millions of records. So you really don't want to do that too much. So, and you can also use these if you want to do some kind of delta migration. You want to sort of like do a first migration, then you want to do what's changed since last time, and then you want to like do an include.
So on DOS, because it's something I come across a lot when people want to run things in parallel. So we have to do the delta out the old system. Is that something you find? Or people that
I've done that as well, but I think sometimes you can do versions where you load the base data first instead, and then you load the transactional data after that. So you can separate it from other perspectives, so you don't actually have to do a delta. You can do it like a delta, but you slice it differently. So I think that's, and if you're migrating old data, I migrate all the old data to a specific date, and then you migrate all the data after that when you do like the full shut off. Yeah. So you don't have to necessarily migrate everything to today, and then like in 2 weeks you migrate everything again that's changed since then, because that might be just trickier.
Yes, you go to switch on that, you don't have to migrate everything up, but you can migrate all the stuff that's not going to change, can't you?
Yeah,
Just the stuff that's really
like all the cold cases and stuff like that, or toast cases and things like that. Yeah, so but it depends on the data how you can separate it, slice it. And then an extra pointer. Try to create the structure first. That's how I like to work with it anyway. So try to get all the tables and like all the transformations with like 1 or 2 fields maybe per table, and get that working, and try to sort of, and don't do all like the 50 columns of that table, just do 2 or 3 columns. So you build a structure, and then you can start push it out and start trying that. Check against your goals, test against the quantities that you're expecting. Are we getting the right things? And then you can have either yourself or somebody else that sort of starts filling in the other columns later on, when you know that you're we're sort of right. And if you have to stop because you're out of time, you still will get something. You will get like the basic load, and if you have legacy identifiers as well, it's easier to like fill up the data afterwards and do that in like a post-migration step. So this is a way that I've sort of used as well, just to make sure that we will do the migration this date. And then exactly what's in the migration, we'll see. But this is like an agile perspective of doing it. So that's why I think it's a good idea to sort of start with the structure. It's very easy to start like, oh, now we're doing contacts first. And then you do everything for the contacts, all the transformations. And then you go to accounts, and then you everything for accounts, and then it's like, oh, we didn't have time for orders.
Yeah.
And then it's better just to use this strategy instead. So I think that's probably a good idea. Okay, we have a few minutes left, I think, for yeah, like 1 minute, I think. Yeah. For questions. There's lots of other tips. For instance, you should, if you're running Visual Studio or SSIS, you can check off the pre-validation. That will also speed up if you're doing if you have 40 steps in Visual Studio, it will drag down the experience. But if you switch off the pre-validation in Visual Studio, that will speed up things as well.
Was that an SSIS? Visual Studio?
We do SSIS scripts, yes. Yeah. We found that if you have large scripts with lots of stuff, it just slows down, and it's because it's trying to validate everything before you do it. You can do switch off pre-validation, it will just validate when you build it. Yeah, but it's a lot faster.
Oh, so somebody else wants to ask. If I go back to my throughput question, do you have any tips on? I mean, let's say you've got 500 billion records and you want them all in data.
I would,
it's going to take days, isn't it?
Yeah. So the throttling, the API service protection, is based on a per user per front end server level layer.
Okay.
Oh, level. That's how they measure it.
Yeah.
So first of all, you make sure that you're not switching on the affinity cookie, which then will spread over the 6 servers that you have that typically instances have.
Right.
So they can use. I'm not sure that that's official, so please don't quote me on that.
Oh, okay.
I think I heard it from support, so
right.
it's not through any NDA. But then the other thing is always use service principals application registrations for doing migrations, and they are not, since they don't cost anything to use. You can spin up 10 of them or 20 of them and use in parallel.
So you need to segment the data in some way.
Yeah, there's in SSIS or Kingsoft, they have something called the balanced load balancer, balanced load distributor. And you can you push your data stream into that, and then you can have 10 different destinations, and it will spread the data over these. You have to make sure that you will, if you don't set the created by field, which if you do set the created by, it will use impersonation. But otherwise, you will see things being written by some of these, it's by migration user 05.
Right. Yeah,
so you just have to make sure that that's not a problem.
Yeah.
Doing that. But otherwise, that's spreading the load over lots of users is probably the best way of doing it. You have to use batching, and I usually do in general. I try to start with 16 threads and 10 in each batch. If you don't use batching, you'll get a 10 times increase in performance, or reduced performance. Yeah. So definitely use those as well. That's a lot, helps a lot. So that's some pointers to that, I would say. And then lookups will take more time as well. So there's some different ways, but yeah, I think there's some stuff on my blog as well. So you can contact me. This is my email. Twitter, LinkedIn, I managed to grab this.
Whoa.
Powerplatform.se, that's my blog, so it's easy to remember. And this is my company.
Okay, cool. Can you say a bit more about that affinity cookie?
Yeah.
So you're going to get him in trouble.
The other thing is that this actually, it's official in the documentation now.
Yeah.
So what happens is that the load balancer that's on the Microsoft side of Dataverse, it's to reduce the latency of normal UI-based interactions. It's all directed towards one of the 6 servers that you have per session. Right? So that means, and it's a good point actually from their perspective, because it will reduce latency. Because it will cache account stuff, and then you can reuse that stuff. So it will become a lot faster.
So point all the resources in one direction.
Yeah, so they will use one of these 6 servers, unless it's not overloaded.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay.
Yeah, but then it will start.
I guess
if you don't include the affinity cookie in your communication with the server, it doesn't know, and then it will use all the 6.
Right, so you
Yeah.
want to make sure you're using the resources.
When you're throwing data at it, you don't really care about responses, do you?
Yeah, so
Same way.
each one's an individual transaction.
Yeah, but you're still getting responses.
Oh, well, true.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Whereas in the UI you want it to cache.
Yeah.
So,
so it's different. You're not so worried. You want more throughput, less data. You can have higher latency, that's fine, but you also want higher throughput. But in the UI, you do typically you're not bothered about throughput that much,
No.
but you want low latency. So it's different requirements from
Is it right in a lot of case with support to have the throttle limits raised temporarily?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't think it's official. I don't know.
No, I think that's
For live migration, you can call the Microsoft.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that's a very good. That's a very good point. You should definitely do that.
For you, because I had the same problem and sit there and maybe had to migrate for a week.
Yeah.
And I wrote a ticket and they said, yeah, give us the time frame. And for this time frame, for this instance, they they changed the API limits.
Oh, right.
And I was done in 1.5 days. So
Oh, wow.
that was, but I could have done in the old days when there was no API limits and just hammer it.
I had one script that was running before the API, the limit stays, and I got a case created to me by Microsoft. They actually called me on my phone saying, "What are you doing? if you don't stop,
It's all his fault.
we will shut your instance down." Like, okay, sorry. So but we were just using Kinkosoft. Like, we tuned the settings a bit, so it made it was rather fast.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I've never happened to me before that Microsoft Support called me. Yeah. And like, hello, we're from Microsoft Support. Yeah, right, you are.
Brilliant.
But then I actually managed to prove who they were. Like, now I believe you.
But there was other people they testing this limit too, and there came the API limit. And
Yeah. But my comment to them was like, if you allow me to use the API this way, it's your problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But now you've caused all the throttling limits.
Sorry. But more work for me as a consultant.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
True. Yeah, for live migrations, Microsoft is still really.
Yeah, but you can relax the throttles as well, right? So for some time. So I think that's important and to be able to do that as well. So there's lots of things you can do, and then if you go from writing one record in one per batch and using one thread, and then not having switched off that, for instance, and so having affinity cookie switched on, then you will, comparing that to doing all these things, you will get like an increase in at least 1,000 in performance. Yeah, I think I would say. Usually it takes like you will get like almost like 1 or 2 records per second if you do it that way. But you can definitely, if you have like 5 users, you can get up to 1,000 records per second.
Yeah.
But your API entitlements will go through the roof, of course, because you're using the service so much. That's another thing.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.